Hi everybody, it's Emma here. Today I thought I'd show you how I made this bench. The first thing that I really needed was I never had a flat surface to work on apart from the concrete floor, and it's not very comfortable working down there. So I decided that I'd like to make a bench. I've got my grandpa's bench over here, but unfortunately it's pretty wobbly now, and at the top of it's got more undulations than the Tour de France. So it's got sentimental value, but it was not that great for building things on. So the considerations I had were that I wanted to get something that was absolutely solid and something that was absolutely level and flat, and it also had to fit in the space that I've got. The other consideration that I had to make was budget, so I didn't want something that cost an absolute fortune. So I managed to find some plans. There was a book at the Woodworkers Club Rooms with a plan for this particular bench, so I borrowed that and I set to work building it. The bench altogether cost me $490 all up, and that included everything: the timber, the vise, the fixings, the paint, the lacquer for some of the edges, absolutely everything. And I think I've got a pretty good solid bench for that, so I'm pretty pleased with that. So the first thing that I had to do was think about the legs. So the legs were pretty important, so I spent the most money purchasing the timber for the legs. So as you can see down here, these legs are perfectly square, and I thought if I got perfectly square legs to start with, then it would make levelling up and stability for the rest of the bench a lot easier when I was building it. These are actually veranda posts. I went down to the timber yard and got them to point out some veranda posts for me. I also got them to cut them to the size that I needed, because they've got magnificent equipment down there, and they cut them precisely for me, so that's what I did. When I got them home, I had to sand them because veranda posts are actually covered with a protective layer of paint so that they're weatherproof. I didn't like the look of that, so I sanded it back to the timber there. So after I got the legs sorted, the next thing I did was I got some pine, and I made two rectangular structural boxes, and they had two struts across the width as well, and one of those forms the structure for the shelf to sit on, and the other one forms the structure for the top to sit on. I inlaid the four corners of those rectangular structures into the legs for extra stability, and I bolted them on as well with a coach screw, and I was pretty keen to make sure I had pretty solid coach screws as well. So with the top one, I actually braced it a whole lot more. So there's actually 12 corners on the structure under this bench top. So I cut 12 of these, and I attached them in each corner for added stability. And then for additional stability, I got a coach screw, and I went up through each of these brackets and screwed it into the bottom of the bench top. So the bench top is actually tied down to that structural component. My wife would tell me that that's over-engineered, and she's probably spot on, but this bench won't move at all. So I'm pretty pleased with the way that turned out. Now, the plans that I borrowed from the club rooms actually called for a timber top. I felt that maybe that was a little bit beyond my skills at that stage, and also the expense of doing that. So I was lucky enough, a neighbour just around the corner was selling 3 massive sheets of this, what I believe is marine grade MDF with a laminate on both sides. So he sold me those 3 massive sheets for $20 a sheet, so I thought I did pretty well there. The laminate required a bit of a clean up, so I cleaned it up really well, and I then put a special laminate primer on it, so that the paint would stick really well. I've put a couple of coats of paint on the shelf, and I've actually got 4 coats of paint on this top. And the reason I did that on the top is that this is going to get scratched and dinted, but I thought if I had 4 layers of paint, it'd take a lot longer before I have to paint it again, because I'm not that keen on painting. So this was the stuff that I used. So the shelf is actually 1 layer of this. It's 30 millimetres thick. The top is actually 2 layers of this stuck on top of one another, so it makes it 60 millimetres thick. But that meant that there was absolutely no way I could lift that top. So I had to call on my dad and my Uncle John and my muscly little nephews Tyson and Luke to actually help me lift this material so that I could cut it and also lift it into place as well. So it's pretty heavy stuff. The one thing I want to point out with that is though that when you cut this stuff, always make sure you wear some really good dust protection like this one, because you know they use all sorts of chemicals and glues in this, and I just wanted to make sure that I was absolutely safe. So the top is 60 mils thick, and it's actually resulted in a bench that is absolutely solid. I can't move it, so it's staying right where it is, but it doesn't move an inch when I'm trying to saw something or trying to screw on something or whatever I'm doing, it can take the punishment. And then just to tidy up the edges a bit, I got some cypress pine and I actually sanded it down so it looked really nice, and made some miter edges on the corners. When I was sanding it, I collected all the sawdust, and I did that because I screwed the cypress pine to the edge of the bench, but I didn't really want to see the screw holes. So Baden up at the Woodworkers Club, he taught me a little trick where you can add this sawdust to some wood glue and actually fill the holes, and so you can't really see the holes as much now, so I'm really happy with the way that turned out. And the last thing I needed to do was install this bench vise. So I had a chat to Vern up at the rooms, and he told me that there's a few different ways you can do that. In the end, I decided to inlay it. So underneath the bench it's actually cut in so that the vise can fit in there. I ended up deciding to make it level with the bench, and I also made the timber on the jaws level with the vise and the bench as well. Now there are ways you can do it so that you don't see these screws holding the vise in, but given that I'm not that experienced, I decided this would be the easier way. I thought it might annoy me a little bit, but it doesn't actually. It's flush with the top and it's completely fine. So yeah, so that's how I built my bench, and the best thing I can say is just have a go. I've had a go and I'm really pleased with the way this has turned out, and it will last me a very long time, I'm sure. Happy woodworking.